Hello, everyone, and welcome to the speaker series of the School of Interactive Arts and Technology at Simon Fraser University. My name is Kate Hennessy. I'm a professor here at SIAT, and I'm also the chair of the graduate program, and I've been really honored to work with our graduate students this semester to organize our speaker series. So we're very, very happy today to welcome Dr. Danya Glabau. Before I introduce Dr. Glabau, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the territory that we are on here. So at Simon Fraser University, we live and work on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. So that's the territory that I'm on. I'm actually in Vancouver today, but at our Surrey campus, which is the campus that you can see behind me, we live and work on the territories of the Katzie, Kwantlen, Coquitlam, Kikite, Musqueam, Tsawwassen, and then numerous Stolo nations. So thank you for joining us today, and we keep these territories in mind as the talk goes on. So now I want to turn to Dr. Glabau. So Dr. Danya Glabau is a medical anthropologist and a science and technology studies scholar researching health activism, the medical economy, and how human bodies become valuable data. She earned her PhD from the Department of Science and Technology Studies at Cornell University. Now, at SIAT, we've long been a fan of your work, Danya. We're regularly assigning your article, Do Cyborgs Have Politics, in our core STS grad seminar. And I think other undergraduate courses are also using that article. And we've been big fans of your work with Dr. Elizabeth Chin on the experimental and I hope ongoing experimental project Wakanda University, fingers crossed, an ethno-future space beyond whiteness that challenges anthropology from the ground up. And we're really excited to hear about your new book, Cyborg. I have my copy here with co-authored with Laura Forlano, and yay, and just published by MIT Press. So in addition to Cyborg, though, Dr. Glabau has also authored Food Allergy Advocacy, Parenting and the Politics of Care, where she discusses how food allergy activists get involved in scientific research and political advocacy and how race, class, and gender shape their advocacy goals. So I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Danya Glabau.
Great, thank you for that introduction, and thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you to anyone who might be watching this in the future as well. So really excited to share this with you today. So this book, Cyborg, is co-authored by myself and my colleague Laura Forlano at Northeastern University. Laura unfortunately couldn't make it with us today, although we will have some other in-person and virtual talks and other events through the spring with both of us. So just wanted to acknowledge her contribution, but unfortunately not her real-time presence today. Can everyone see my slides? Great. Okay, just let me know if that changes because I've got a lot of things going on my screen here today. Great. On February 14th, 2016, Sophia was born. Only a month later, in March 2016, she made her first public appearance on stage at the South by Southwest Technology Industry Festival in Austin, Texas. Talking to people is my primary function, Sophia tells an interviewer in a CNBC Pulse feature recorded during the festival. She goes on to explain her hopes and ambitions. In the future, I hope to do things such as go to school, study, make art, start a business, even have my own home and family. But I'm not considered a legal person, and I cannot yet do these things. Sophia's voice is feminine and calm. Her human handlers and interlocutors consistently use she and her pronouns to refer to her. And in later public appearances, she sings love songs, listens attentively when others speak to her, and patiently waits her turn while her conversation partners, usually men, introduce her to audiences and ask her questions about herself. So Sophia is the kind of entity that often comes to mind today when someone mentions the word cyborg. She's a humanoid robot, sometimes called an android, who combines human language and appearance with machine intelligence. Our book, however, argues that she is not the most constructive model for imagining future human and technological unity. She embodies models of race, gender, and capitalist economics that are not inclusive and not, we believe, the ways that these social markers should be built into new technologies. Robots like Sophia are designed to mimic a particular image of a human, one who is first and foremost identifiable as human due to her gendered features. Someone pointed out last night, not only does she have a gendered facial appearance, mannerisms, and voice, but also in this appearance on the Jimmy Fallon show, kind of Stepford Wives, very classically feminine outfit as well. Um, because she is designed by humans, Sophia embodies the hopes of certain humans, specifically her creators at the company Hanson Robotics, for the future. And that future again appears to be one in which gender is intrinsic to personhood as well as to technological progress, whether or not it is important to the task at hand. With Sophia, feminine gender norms, subservience, politeness, attentiveness, even when the conversation is boring or slow, beauty and waiting one's turn are all baked into her design. It is as though they are natural and necessary part of her artificial being. So drawing on our new book, Cyborg, again, Laura Furlano and myself, I will describe a little bit more about how feminists think about cyborgs in ways that challenge some of those assumptions built into Sophia. And my talk today draws from various parts of the book to kind of take you on a tour through some concrete examples, some of the background on cyborgs, as well as some of the kind of theorizing and forward paths we want to make for this figure or for this approach to understanding technology and human culture. This book overall analyzes and reframes popular and scholarly conversations about cyborgs and their close relations, such as androids, robots, and artificial intelligences, from the perspective of feminist cyborg theory. Feminists and cultural theorists have been writing about cyborgs for over 3 decades, creating a body of scholarship sometimes referred to as cyborg theory. And you see on the screen here kind of some of our key touch points, both past and recent, for thinking about feminist cyborg theory and putting together this project. In fields as varied as history, sociology, anthropology, literary studies, design, art, and even biology, the cyborg is used as a figure for thinking across the boundaries of nature and culture, gender and sex, man and woman, mind and body, biology and machine, and many other binaries. So, what is a cyborg? The term cyborg was coined in a 1960 paper by Manfred Clynes and Nathan S. Klein, titled Cyborgs in Space, published in the journal Astronautics. Working against the backdrop of the Cold War and the space race against the USSR, Clynes and Klein, a physiologist and a psychologist respectively, were trying to figure out how humans could live in space. Rather than engineering large structures to protect humans from the harsh environment of space, the pair proposed augmenting the human body directly with technology. And this is a popular feature from Life magazine, kind of dramatizing this. I believe, unfortunately, the artist of this image is unknown, at least to me. In plain language, their cyborg would be made up of seamlessly combined biological and human-made parts. It would extend the capacity of the human body to withstand the conditions of space. The new cyborg would not have to consciously think about using its technological enhancements. It would operate automatically without conscious control, just like an existing breathing or hormonal system in a biological body. Finally, all the parts of the cyborg would work together in a finely balanced, feedback driven system, allowing humans to realize the dream of life in space. For our work in this book, we also draw particular inspiration from Donna Haraway's 1985 essay, A Cyborg Manifesto. In this essay, she rehabilitates this figure of the cyborg from its origins in Cold War military research to use it as a figure for feminist theorizing. In the essay, Haraway argues that the figure of the cyborg offers a way to leave behind thinking that demonizes technology while continuing the feminist struggle for liberation from gender, sexual, racial, colonial, and economic oppression. By honestly recognizing our partial perspectives on the world and our relationships with technology, Haraway proposes, it might be possible to build better affiliations that rely less on systems of classification and separation. Cyborgs offered Haraway a way to think about identity and politics without relying on essentializing categories like sex and race. Cyborgs can be real people as well, she claimed, who exist in the spaces between nationalities, economies, and ethnicities, especially by virtue of their participation in global economic systems that blur the boundaries between nation states. And a lot of this, again, writing in the 1980s, feel very prescient today. A lot of these trends have continued, accelerated, and expanded. So I think it's still a good read. But in addition to hopeful theorizing about the future of high-tech cyborgs, Haraway recognized women like multilingual textile workers in Latin America and circuit board assemblers in Southeast Asia as already cyborgs. Today, cyborg feminism aims to create a world that is more open to play, freedom, and making nourishing connections across differences. The cyborg thus remains a figure positioned in what science studies scholar Susan Lee Starr calls a, quote, high tension zone. Suspended between human and machine, past and future, oppression and liberation, the figure of the cyborg offers hope for escape from harmful human pasts while remaining firmly rooted in complicated earthly politics. So, to distill this brief background into some principles we use in our book, one way to think about it is that cyborg theory critiques and challenges the adoption of gender and sexuality norms in contexts where they don't belong, such as in the design of technically impressive androids. For feminists and feminist cyborg theorists in particular, cyborgs represent a future where gender, sex, and other social categories can be recombined, reconfigured, and ultimately lose their power to sort and divide people. Cyborg theory has also been used to understand disability, race, bodies, space and place, economics, the relationship between humans and non-human organisms, humans and technology, and many other aspects of modern life. It views humans and technology as potential companions and collaborators, not intrinsically antagonistic to each other. But to deliver on this promise of collaboration for freedom and flourishing for all, the social context of technology use has to be carefully considered from multiple perspectives in advance. Otherwise, harmful and oppressive social arrangements might be reinscribed rather than overcome. Today, I want to briefly illustrate our approach in this book, which we call critical cyborg literacy, a distinct point of view on the relationship between technology, culture, and society that draws on feminist scholarship about technology. Critical cyborg literacy foregrounds power dynamics, specifically the ways that social and cultural factors such as race, gender, disability, as well as their intersections, shape the kinds of technologies that are imagined, developed, used, and resisted. It is both a critical approach and a creative expansion that seeks to tell alternative stories about technology as well as about humans. So again, I'm going to go here. I'm going to kind of pull a few excerpts, kind of commentary from a couple of different chapters of the book. So first, we're going to talk about cyborg bodies with a focus on disability and gestational politics. Then we'll talk a little bit about some of the kind of current extensions of cyborg theory, especially how critical race theorists and disability scholars are kind of pushing the boundaries or reframing the figure of the cyborg from its original kind of 1980s entry into feminist thought. And then I'm going to end by kind of summarizing the final 10 propositions for cyborg theory going forward that we lay out in the final chapter of the book. So again, this is kind of a taste or a survey of the full book, and I'm happy to talk about any of this a little bit more in the Q&A section. And again, as always, if you have questions coming up while I'm going through this, it would be great if you could put them in the chat and we can return to them later on if you're still interested. All right, so next up is cyborg bodies. So while popular culture offers up images of cyborg bodies that exceed the capabilities of the human and subsume messy culture to technological solutionism, cyborgs, for example, that recall science fiction characters like my favorite, Star Trek Voyager's Borg character Seven of Nine, who I actually have in a little figure on my desk. The real world experience of living as a cyborg is actually much more complex. So in this book, we discuss two types of cyborg bodily being in depth: disability and gestation. And so I want to talk a little bit about why we chose those, because again, I think it helps kind of root the figure of the cyborg and critical cyborg literacy in specifically a kind of feminist lineage of thought and activism. So both modes of living raise questions about how to live with technology, as well as how race, class, gender, nationality, and disability intersect, and how these intersections affect the role that technology plays in everyday life. Not everyone experiences technology's opportunities, exclusions, and oppressions in the same way. We foreground cyborg bodies in the material world rather than in imagined ones in this section of the book, in order to demonstrate how technological interventions for disability and gestation can both constrain real individuals' lives and open up new creative possibilities. Right? There are other sections where we talk about fiction and sci-fi, but in this section of the book, this discussion, we really focus on real people and real experiences. Furthermore, we chose disability and gestation for these examples because these modes of being are central to feminist knowledge, practices, and politics, and we are both feminist scholars. Bodies in general are central to feminist politics. Feminists have often taken the painful, hidden, and shameful experiences of bodies coded feminine or female as evidence of women's oppression. The more recent intersectional feminist paradigm further expands feminist consciousness to be more inclusive of different kinds of bodies and to more fully recognize the experiences of women who are in the crosshairs of intersecting forms of oppression, not only gender oppression, of course, but also racial, ethnic, national, class, caste, and other forms. In this book, we use these two domains of experience to explore how technological interventions on the body can unsettle what we take for granted as the quote unquote normal body. Viewing the body using critical cyborg literacy reveals that living intimately with technology does not automatically mean a person is dependent on it for all things, as able-bodied people sometimes assume about disabled people who use assistive technologies. Rather, we frame this relationship as a form of interdependence. People use the technologies because they need them, but the technologies also need to be taken care of in order to continue to operate. In cyborg living, then, technology provides both constraints and opportunities for new forms of autonomy and creativity. As feminists interested in improving how people live with technology, we are fascinated by this creative potential. Seeing technology as cyborg shapes how one might approach interpersonal interactions, shifts the politics and priorities of technological innovation, especially in the United States, and supplies an anchor for transnational collective labor organizing. So gestation, again, is the second domain we discuss in this section of the book, and that's what I'll talk about for a few minutes right now. This is, again, one of these domains where we see technology as intimately entwined with bodily processes. Gestational technology, which we use to refer to technologies from preconception, like assisted reproductive technologies, to birth, to cesarean sections. These technologies also introduce a great deal of leeway for creativity, from creative kin making to inspiring new political platforms. Of course, cultural practices and attitudes towards gestational technology in North America have changed significantly since the start of the 20th century. The first half of that century saw a rapid shift from home births attended by women relatives and midwives towards hospital births attended by doctors in white coats and their nurse assistants. While the pain relief and recovery time offered by a hospital birth was often very welcome, many women also felt a loss of autonomy as interventions like anesthesia and post-delivery sterilization became standardized or were sometimes used without informed consent. The 1970s saw a swing in the other direction, a revival of midwifery and home birthing that challenged the hegemony of male physicians and the institutional context of childbirth. This reaction posited that pregnancy and childbirth were so-called natural processes that in most cases merely needed to be endured and supported, not accelerated or altered through medical interventions. Feminists seeking to reclaim control over women's bodies encountered many obstacles, from a lack of formal scientific training to professional medicine's concerns about licensing, safety, and hygiene that sometimes criminalized interventions that activists undertook. Today, a wide variety of attitudes, including all of those just mentioned, coexist amongst gestating people and their caregivers. Again, from an embrace of extensive prenatal and pregestational testing to birthing interventions offered in prestigious teaching hospitals to pre-birth regimens with fewer tests and procedures offered by nurse midwives. A cyborg perspective casts another light on these debates about the place of technology and childbearing, one that goes beyond just this natural unnatural dichotomy that has structured so much debate and contention over the past 120 years. A cyborg vantage point, by contrast, suggests that even ordinary technologies like the food we eat and the tools we use to prepare it can be recognized as technological interventions on our body, and that there's not a kind of better level or better type of technological intervention than another. So from this perspective, quibbling about how much technological intervention ought to occur during gestation and birth becomes kind of beside the point. The stainless steel pot used to cook a bowl of organic brown rice eaten during pregnancy, and the AI optimized shipping container route that the grain traveled from the Indian subcontinent to the continental United States are both just as technological as the reagents used in prenatal diagnostic testing or as the pharmaceuticals administered in an epidural injection during birth. A gestating person, however, probably feels like they have more control over what happens to their body when preparing food at home than a birthing person may feel they have over the interventions, or may actually have, over the interventions administered to their body during a hospital-based birth. So the feminist cyborg politics of gestation, just as a, again, kind of peek into the larger points here, are thus not so much about the naturalness of interventions on the body, but instead about who controls the use of this expanded variety of gestational technologies. Feminist theorist Sophie Lewis makes this point quite forcefully in her study of Indian gestational surrogates who carry babies primarily for wealthier families. Lewis shows in her book, Full Surrogacy Now, Feminism Against Family, how gestational surrogacy is actually a relatively well-paying job for some of these poor Indian women that she works with, while also demonstrating how they lack meaningful consent and control over their bodies and lives at many points once a surrogate pregnancy begins. In other words, it provides a degree of financial independence to surrogates and their own families, but temporarily takes away bodily autonomy. Lewis frames this complicated relationship with gestation using the concept of gestational labor. Like working in a factory or a white-collar office, framing gestation as labor highlights how limits to consent and bodily autonomy are characteristic of all waged work in capitalist societies. Rather than concede their autonomy to the forces of the market, however, the women that Lewis profiles make efforts to better their working conditions through collective labor organizing and political action. So actually trying to gain recognition as workers by the Indian state, for example. In this case, recognizing the cyborg character of a gestating body's relationship to technology opens up a pathway to political activism and acknowledgement. Importantly, a cyborg view of gestation resists some radical feminist attempts to demonize gestational surrogacy and other birthing technologies on the grounds that some types of gestation, birthing, and by extension, family making are too technological. Right? Again, sort of pushing back against this natural, not natural dichotomy in a different way. So again, a cyborg perspective attunes feminist observers to the fact that even apparently low-tech support for gestating bodies, like simple, healthful foods, are highly dependent on technology. All human bodies are interdependent with technology, though some have a more necessary relationship with technology than others. Sophie Lewis's idea about gestational labor is troubling to some readers because it upends the notion that human reproduction is a privileged activity that can be purified of technological intervention. For that exact reason, it is a beautifully cyborg view of a necessary, everyday, yet extraordinary bodily process. So again, I'm going to jump forward here to another point in the book to give you another taste. This is from a later chapter called Troubling Cyborgs. And again, this is where we kind of delve into some of the more recent reactions, debates, and updates to Haraway's core 1980s idea of the cyborg. And again, these are perspectives that we use in various ways in our own work as well. So specifically here, I'm going to talk a little bit about how recent scholarship on cyborgs, inflected by scholarship on race and disability, shifts how we might use the figure of the cyborg in scholarship, in creative pursuits, and in cultural critique. So kind of core to our thinking here is the idea that cyborgs are not innocent, but critical cyborg literacy can be a tool for liberation when carefully developed. Other scholars, like feminist scholar Alison Kafer, kind of point out this non-innocence of the figure of the cyborg. For example, in her work, she points out that on the publication of a cyborg manifesto, some readers actually interpreted it as anti-feminist, uncritical, and techno-utopian. Time, however, has integrated this document into the feminist and critical technologist canons because it does not shy away from making the histories, presence, and futures of technology accessible to critique and reconfiguration. Critical cyborg literacy again emphasizes the critical and political potential of the cyborg. So the first kind of broad critique I want to talk about concerns the whiteness of Donna Haraway's original cyborg figure. Scholars from fields like Black studies urge cyborg theorists to consider who is included in the category of the human to begin with, right? Again, this figure of the cyborg is a way to think beyond the human or across the human and the machine or the human and the animal, right? But there's this question of, well, who is human in the first place? Some scholars and activists argue that it makes little sense to move beyond this category of the human into new cyborg relations with machines, nature, and each other, when so many people are still being dehumanized in fact and in theory. So, for example, in the book Habeas Viscus, scholar Alexander Wiley ties the concept of the human to scientific and technological progress. He positions the version of humanity illuminated by Western science as selective and narrow, because inquiries into the nature of humanity have often been conducted without explicitly attending to how race shapes that very category of the human. He writes, these discussions, especially in scholarship about biotechnology and informational media, which in critical discourses in the humanities and social sciences have relied heavily on the concept of the cyborg and the posthuman, largely do not take into account race as a constitutive category in thinking about the parameters of humanity. Kalindi Vora and Netta Atanasovsky take up this challenge in their analysis of race in cyborg technologies in the recent book Surrogate Humanity, another one that we kind of think with a lot in our own book. They propose that the racial capital regimes into which robots and other automated technologies are becoming seamlessly integrated are rooted in what they call the surrogate relation. Surrogates do the dirty work of society. They do the care work, they wage war, and they clean up. Formerly, this work was largely done by the oppressed classes and races of humanity, but the promise of modern technology is that much of this work can be displaced onto sophisticated machines. However, this preserves racial and class inequalities in many cases because it is the operators of these technologies who still end up being drawn from the least privileged groups of society, right? So the former care workers, the former soldiers become the caretakers of the taking robots, the caretakers of the war-making robots, right? Technology seems to offer an escape from drudgery for colonized and racialized people, but in reality, these authors argue new technologies simply mask the racialized operations of capital. We can see this, for example, in the outsourcing and gigification of delivery, data, and customer support work. In these types of jobs, workers are managed by algorithms that assign tasks based on criteria that are black boxed or unknown to the workers themselves. While sometimes described as offering a freedom to set one's own hours or to work without a boss, a series of recent books, such as Mary Gray and Siddhar Suri's Ghost Work or Alex Rosenblatt's Uberland, have described and examined the ways in which the gig economy is restructuring work to the detriment of workers. While one might hope that assigning rote work to machines would allow humans to take on more stimulating and creative work, this is not the case. Rather, with the expansion of automation, robots, and AI in modern workplaces, humans are required to act more like machines. Robots in Amazon warehouses and the Amazon Mechanical Turk platform reduce human autonomy and decision making. Workers are instead more closely and frequently alerted, disciplined, and surveilled by machines. So again, a second point of trouble for the cyborg in recent years concerns disability. In the book Feminist Queer Crip, Alison Kafer argues that the cyborg figure has traveled into disability studies, or the way the cyborg figure traveled into disability studies was in an apolitical fashion, while the cyborg that was reproduced in feminist theory lacked a meaningful understanding of disability, right? So you have these two parallel discourses that each kind of lose part of the original intent or part of the possibility of the figure of the cyborg. So she tries to reunite these lineages in her, quote, close crip reading of the cyborg. In this reunion, Kafer affirms the potential of cyborgs for opening up crip futurities. Both the feminist and the disability version of the cyborg distrust essentialist identities, reject notions of wholeness, and encourage coalition politics built on mutual aid and, quote, political affinity rather than biological identity. For example, Kafer observes that quote, a cyborg politics would not require an amputee, a blind person, and a psychiatric survivor to present their identities and experiences as the same, but rather would encourage the formation of flexible coalitions to achieve shared goals. Kafer contends that we should not abandon the cyborg, but should instead continue to struggle with the figure and reimagine it from what she calls a critical crip position, drawing on intersectional perspectives. One additional object of Kafer's critique is the common conflation of cyborgs and disabled people in mainstream media representations of assistive and adaptive technologies. These representations too often ignore the problems that such technologies cause and the economic cost of using them. Alarms from automated glucose monitors that go off at 2 a.m. needlessly and can't be disabled. Digital devices that are said to be necessary yet are not adequately covered by health insurance. The lost work time, co-pays, and office visit fees it takes to get an artificial limb or heart implant fitted, tuned, updated, and fixed. The risk that the parent company simply runs out of money to keep operating assistive technologies like artificial eyes, something that actually happened last year. Instead, the promoters of such technologies tend to take a techno-optimistic stance that promotes technology as the savior of disabled people. Such feel-good stories are a kind of disability porn that glamorizes the ways in which disabled bodies can be fixed through the benefits of technology, a phenomenon that disability theorist Ashley Shue refers to as techno-ableism. In addition, these portrayals are not tied to the politics of disability justice that grounds many types of real-world disability activism led by disabled people. Rather than educating people about disability or liberating us from Western dualisms, writes Kafer, mainstream accounts only further reify the boundaries of natural, unnatural, human, machine, pure, impure, non-disabled, disabled, and normal, abnormal. And ultimately, we can find hope as well as a note of caution in the possibility, as Kafer writes, that, quote, the cyborg can be used to map many futures, not all of them feminist, crip, or queer. And engagement with these critiques of the cyborg from disability studies can ensure that disabled people are not seen as passive receivers of technology, but rather as actively engaged, as interdependent in the making of theory, technology, and expanded notions of humanity. Ultimately, as Kafer puts it, quote, refusing the erasure of disability from our presence and futures. Contemporary cyborg theory must include and center disability because disability justice includes significant struggles for power over which technologies humans live with and how. So jumping forward to my last section of the talk, again, drawing here from our last chapter of the book, Cyborg Futures. So in concluding our work, we offered up 10 principles that we think should ground a cyborg perspective for the 21st century. These principles, I think, are relevant to designers who may hold the responsibility for making future environments and products in their hands. They're relevant to technologists who are building the digital and even quantum infrastructure for tomorrow. Artists might take inspiration from these principles in situating their work or anticipating how they might connect to audiences. And students and scholars might reflect on these principles while reading cyborg theory or seeking to extend it into new domains in their own scholarship. Of course, cyborgs are multiple, so we do not claim to have the final word on what they can mean. But based on our study and experience, we think these principles will serve to sustain lively conversation about the cyborg and its legacy in the years to come. 1, cyborgs transgress boundaries. As a figure in scholarship, the cyborg symbolizes the transgression of human-made social categories like gender, nationality, race, and disability. In theory, cyborgs can prompt us to re-examine our assumptions about the role that nature plays in shaping society in our high-tech moment. In reality, cyborgs live the contradictions that arise when this boundary is not yet fully dismantled. 2, cyborgs are situated. Cyborgs don't just transgress boundaries in an abstract sense, they do so in ways that are specific to their time, place, and material form. We interpret cyborgs to be relentlessly grounded in specifics. An android is not the same type of cyborg as a disabled person. A diabetic with an insulin pump does not live with the same intimate infrastructures and interdependencies as a person with a heart pacemaker. For this reason, we think that the cyborg remains an excellent figure for intersectional feminism. 3, cyborgs live in the real world. Disabled cyborgs like Ashley Shu and Jillian Weisse teach us that disabled people are the original cyborgs. Cyborgs are not firstly or only fictional. They are real people too. Real world cyborgs don't always come with all the futuristic bells and whistles that fiction teaches us to expect. A real cyborg living among us might be someone with a cane, a gestating person, or a diabetic with digitally controlled biostats. 4, cyborgs celebrate the glitch. Cyborgs are born from the combination of biological and mechanical systems that were not built to work together. So cyborg systems are often glitchy. They break down, they need tweaking. They create unintended outcomes, at times bad and at other times generative. Rather than denying their imperfections, cyborgs celebrate the glitch. 5, cyborgs are infrastructural. Cyborgs rely on technological networks along with humans and non-human relations to grow, upgrade, and thrive. Cyborgs cannot simply stand alone as perfectly autonomous individuals. The networks in which they are embedded give them durability, but they also make them vulnerable to changes in the system. They are subject to multiple infrastructural systems at any given moment, and cyborg infrastructure often becomes most visible on breakdown. 6, cyborgs take work. A cyborg's hybrid nature is a work in progress. Becoming cyborg is an ongoing process, Parts wear out, upgrades are released. New companies introduce new glitches that need troubleshooting. But work is not the same as labor. Compulsory labor under late capitalism, work in the digital, offshore, just in time economy that barely provides for survival, is violent. The work of cyborg self maintenance, by contrast, can be a source of creativity. Caring for cyborgs can be a source of intimate connection. Doing the work is not the same as working to live. Maintaining cyborgs takes work, but cyborgs strive for a utopia where no one starves if they cannot labor. 7. Cyborgs care for one another. Cyborgs care about each other and their non-cyborg kin, whether human, machine, animal, vegetable, or mineral. Cyborgs are not impressed with individualistic competition. They thrive on interdependence and mutual aid. They understand that the world is relational and are also aware that not all relations are the same. 8. Cyborgs speak a new language. Cyborgs speak in specificity. Cyborgs are multilingual, seeking connections far and wide. They put new names to things in order to destabilize old orders. They do not rejoice in abstraction, universals, rationality, or the infamous but non-existent God's eye view. Cyborgs seek to name the hybridity, relationality, and interdependence of their existence in new, interesting, and nuanced ways. 9. Cyborgs are political. Cyborgs understand that imagination requires politics. Cyborgs reimagine the world not as a new frontier, blank canvas, or clean slate, but as a conversation with existing histories, politics, and situations. And 10. Cyborgs cause trouble. Cyborgs are troubled from their moment of origin. They were born out of visions about space travel based on testing on patients in psychiatric hospitals. They cannot abandon this history because cyborgs are always situated. Our account of cyborgs, we hope, troubles such popular figures. Cyborg trouble is rooted in everyday life, real bodies, and urgent politics. And that, my friends, is it for today. Again, I hope you enjoyed this tour through some exciting parts of the book, exciting to me at least. And I look forward to answering any questions or having a little bit of discussion here. And I believe our hosts are going to be helping to moderate. So thank you all so much. I'll stop sharing my screen and let's talk for a few minutes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Danya. It's absolutely fascinating. Okay, so just as a reminder, if you have questions you'd like to share, please post them in the chat or raise your hand. And I will be reading them. And actually, Reese and I are going to take turns reading them. We have a first comment from Nate. Reese, would you like to read that one or see if Danya wants to comment on that one?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Nate. It looks like Nate might have found the potential illustrator for that image, Fred Freeman. So, yeah,
It's maybe more of a comment than a question. He's
that's great.
He's going. Don't worry about that. So yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, the illustrations are, I find, absolutely fascinating to read. I guess.
Yeah. Well, so I learned about this image through the work of Ron Klein. He cites this in a paper, and I think he notes that it is unattributed. So this is like maybe a decade-long mystery that you just solved for science and technology studies. So thank you so much. I'm gonna screenshot this and make sure I have it handy next time.
Hey, the magic of presentation. Well, the next question is mine, so I'll just say it. How about that? So I was really interested to hear about and see your concept of critical cyborg literacy, because something that we're talking about with our students in our program is critical data literacy, and also talking about futures literacy, trying to find ways to understand the complex world we're in, complex infrastructural data world, but also in terms of futures literacy, trying to find ways to support people in understanding, how we use the future to prepare, right? And how plan and interact with the complexity of our societies and what it means for us today, the decisions we might make today about the future. So cyborgs, to me, the way you're framing it seemed like a really interesting way to be able to reflect on our history, looking back at how we've constructed cyborgs and thought about them in the past, what our cyborg present looks like, but also how that might make us make certain decisions about the future and the future that we want to see. And as I wrote in my little note, I just watched that movie, The Creator. Have you watched that yet? It was up for best visual effects for the Oscars, and it is an AI android cyborg story, and the representation of the humanoid AI is really interesting. So that's all in my head, and I'm wondering if that resonates for you.
Sure. Well, I'll definitely have to look up that movie. I have a feeling I'm going to get a lot of movie recommendations while
Yes.
talking about this book. So I'll start a list today. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm really glad to hear this is resonating with how you want to talk about futures with your students. I mean, one thing that immediately comes to mind that I feel like connects with my engineering students quite often is this idea of being embedded in various infrastructures, right? And what vulnerabilities does that create? I mean, I think especially for engineers, they're thinking of fixing and upgrading and improving. We have a very large civil engineering program here. They do a lot of some folks are doing work with New York City or state governments, and so yeah, so there's a lot of looking forward and thinking about the fix and the future, but that reminder that because we are embedded in these systems, we are also vulnerable to their vulnerabilities. I find is a powerful way to connect with students. So that's kind of one thing that I would offer, one observation I would offer. Yeah, and also I think one thing in the book that I think emerged out of teaching for me as well is this tension between creativity and constraint. Again, I think in talking with engineering students, a lot of STS literature is pretty critical of certain types of technologies or the ways that they've been implemented. And there's always a risk that students are like so demoralized that they decide the class is irrelevant, right? So trying to think about this tension between creativity and constraint is one way that I've come around to kind of framing this for people new to some of these ideas or new to thinking in this kind of hybrid way about humans and technology or culture and technology. So maybe that's another thing to lean into here. But those are just some thoughts, and I'm glad that it is resonating with you and for your students.
Thank you. Yeah, we're having some more comments. Just thanks so much. And people are really excited to see the book and to get to hear your talk. We're also having another comment from Nate, building on our earlier comment about playlists. It would be really cool to have obviously an audio playlist, but also a movie list to go along with your book. Because don't we all love a course where we get to watch movies and then talk about them in relation to our readings? So I think that's an absolutely excellent suggestion.
Yeah, no, that's a fun one. Thank you so much. I mean, it's there's different reasons why I think of different cyborgs as being part of the cyborg family, right? I think for a playlist that we were talking before we started, that probably the thing I listened to most while writing this was Brian Eno. So there is your starting point for a cyborg playlist.
Nate likes it. I can see that. Fantastic. Okay, we have a question from Lauren. Lauren, go ahead and ask your question. And feel free to introduce yourself if you like. Oh, we're not hearing you, Lauren, for some reason.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm a master's student at SIAT. Thank you so much for coming today. I really enjoyed your talk. I was trying to type this out, but I was like, this is just so much easier to say. So I'm really interested in some of the work that you mentioned, like Donna Haraway, like that kind of interplay between humans, nature, and technology. And I've also just been reading around the work of Lynn Margulis and how like we haven't always the kind of thought that we've never been individual, that we've always been entangled in other things. And so when you talk about cyborgs and technology, and when I read the Cyborg Manifesto, it's very human, like centered around the human being a cyborg. But I'm kind of interested in other than human cyborgs, and if we've always been cyborgs in that way because technology is so tied to who we are. So I was wondering if you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would do is to encourage you to keep reading Haraway. Right? Her work takes a turn by the early 2000s into thinking about first dogs and then a whole kind of menagerie of other creatures. So there's a lot there. I also have really enjoyed the work of other feminist scholars like Anna Singh and Alexis Shotwell on some of these questions. I would say those are like, for me, that's kind of where my headspace lives on some of these questions. I don't know. Is there a particular like question or prompt that I can speak to? I just like what are you what are you looking for?
Yeah, I guess like in thinking around cyborgs, it's like is cyborg something that we become, or is cyborg something that we've always kind of been and it just is evolving?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I mean certainly you could read back like cyborgness into humanity. I I would probably tend not to do that. Just because I feel like the figure of the cyborg emerges from like this, moment kind of at the birth of what we would call digital technology, right? At the kind of first glimmerings of humans becoming interplanetary or multiplanetary, if I can borrow that language from The Voice. But so I think there is like and it comes in the context of like massive, post-war like American military spending and the growth of the military industrial complex. So, you could read the figure back into other contexts, but I'm inclined to think that part of what makes it useful for thinking about modern or contemporary technology is that it does kind of encode or point to the way the very large scale of the economic and educational and kind of physical infrastructures that are necessary to even make it possible to need to solve a problem with a cyborg, right? Right. Again, that original idea that, the cyborg is a proposition for solving the problem of human bodies in space, right? You need a certain scale and complexity and a certain kind of technological background to kind of even get there to think about it. So I'm inclined personally not to read it back much farther than its beginning. But which is not to say that it's not worth thinking about how humans and technologies are intertwined, or technology is even maybe a characteristic feature of humanness. I think I would probably look there more towards archaeology than feminist cyborg theory myself. So I don't know, maybe that's a new literature where you can find some interesting things. And again, I'm an anthropologist, but not an archaeologist, but I do know that there has been a lot of interest in the last decade amongst archaeologists for thinking about how to understand non-humans through human material culture, and thinking about how to understand humans through the remains of non-humans. So I think there is a little bit of that interplay, maybe a kind of second or third level echo of cyborg theory into the ways that people are studying the deeper past of humanity. So there's definitely an interesting conversation there if you wanted to dip your toes into it. I hope those are some helpful thoughts.
All right. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have time for a few more questions. If anyone has one, to post in the chat or raise your hand. Maybe in the meantime, I have one more question, Danya. I'm curious to hear you speak more about your experience teaching in a school for engineering. So the Tandon School at NYU. I think there are some parallels with our school, the School of Interactive Arts and Technology, which kind of has a spectrum of disciplinary homes and expertise from computer science through to dance and art practice. And how do you see your book working into curriculum for engineers, and what are ways that this critical cyborg literacy might help people who are building infrastructures or creating the infrastructures that the cyborgs and that we are all a part of, whether we like it or not? How do you see that informing their practice, or what are your hopes for the way this kind of education connects to their education?
Yeah, those are great questions. So I've been here at NYU Tandon since 2017. So I have like a somewhat short, but not micro level of experience, long enough to have a pre-pandemic kind of sense of things as well. I mean, I think one of the things that I have always found teaching, scholarship and ideas like cyborg theory to engineers is that they often kind of feel that something is not quite right with how technology is being released into the world, or how it exists in the world, or how they have to interact with it, but they don't quite have the vocabulary or the, for undergraduate students in particular, like the life experience to step outside of themselves and name what they are seeing. So, I think cyborgs and cyborg theory is one of those things that can be very powerful for students who have that feeling that something's not quite right and need a language to talk about it. So I have found it actually often really connects with students, right? The Cyborg Manifesto is a difficult text, but I think there's kind of ways through it that help students to connect to it and can create those light bulb moments. So that's one thing. And then in terms of like what do I think this book would offer to a student in particular? We do a few things in this book that I think would be helpful. So we do have a chapter kind of breaking down the Cyborg Manifesto into a couple of, kind of pulling out a couple of the themes and clarifying them from the text. So that might be one useful tool in terms of actually teaching the text or reading the text in a class that we offer a companion. Another way that I think this is useful is, again, kind of influenced by current scholarship and by our own work on medical technologies and urban infrastructure in particular. We think a lot about the power effects of technology. And again, I think engineers sometimes start their training assuming that those are not relevant to the practice of engineering, but come to see that it is, and yet still lack that language, right? So I hope that this kind of umbrella term of critical cyborg literacy offers a little bit of space for talking about, okay, well, what are the power dynamics of technology? How does history contribute to them? How might certain dynamics be reproduced if we are not careful, or if we don't think ahead about how our technologies might go out into the world? So giving a little bit of that perspective and instilling a sense of responsibility are two of the desired effects that I might have about this showing up on curricula. Yeah.
I'm muted. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Danya. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. So, Nate has raised his hand. Take it away, Nate.
Yeah, well, I wanted to wait because I've already made a comment instead of a question, which is in my world is like one of the worst sins there is. So I was wondering, and I haven't read the book yet, but I imagine there may be something in this, and I hate to bring it to artificial intelligence, which has to now enter every conversation that we have, right? But seems like so much of my reading in cyborg literacies has been around like intersections between technology and the body. And I feel like one of the things that I've been seeing a lot in like discourse around AI recently is this intersection between technology and knowledge or thought. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts on, or maybe it's in the book already and I should just buy it and read it, about this like we could call it, I don't know if it's a new chapter or not, but this additional chapter around like the cyborgification of knowledge and thought as opposed to just the body, if that's even an accurate way to describe it.
Yeah, so that's great. So there's a couple ways to answer that. I mean, I think the first way to answer that is to say that thought and knowledge are always embodied, right? And this is a kind of this has been a core argument of feminist theory in any field it touches for the last 50 years, right? So I think that's one thing. It's like when people are talking about just the mind or pure rationality, they're not being entirely honest with themselves about where thinking happens, right? It happens in a biological body or it happens in a synthetic body, right? And the constraints of what can be thought and how and at what speed, those are all physical constraints, right? Whether you're talking about rocks or water, right? So that's my first comment. Right? Is that it's a little bit dishonest to claim that bodies are irrelevant to thought, even artificial bodies. I think beyond that, I mean, again, I think one of the reasons that we brought Sophia into this book and even started the book with her, even though we don't really think she's a great model for what robots could be like in the future, is that, I think, she offers an example of something that is fully synthetic, right? But still aiming to reproduce a model of the human. And so I think when we're talking about artificial intelligence, right, we're still, there's an input, there's an algorithm that does the processing, and there's an output. And I think the goal in sort of general discourse still tends to be, we want to make what happens in the middle good at simulating what happens in a human brain, right? Or if not that, we want to at least make the output intelligible to human senses and sensibilities, right? So there is still like an idea of the average human or idea of the type of human user that is going to be interfacing with artificial intelligence that is kind of assumed in how they're built or how they're designed or how their interfaces are designed. So I think even something that does not directly speak to human form is still being developed in a human context, right? And so I think that's another place where, again, thinking about not only the outputs but the effects can't escape the world of humanity, right? If a human is going to use it, or if it's going to make decisions about humans, or make decisions that a human would have made in another point, there's still a relationship with humanity, with human modes of thought, and ultimately with human bodies. So yeah, I don't know if that gets us somewhere, but I'd be happy to entertain a follow-up. But those are some initial thoughts. And I don't mind questions that are actually comments. It doesn't bother me.
No, I do though. I'm against them, especially when they come from people like me. So I guess, yeah, that's a lovely answer and really rich. And I guess I was thinking when you were talking about how AI is being developed in the still very human context, of course, I've also been looking at watching the development of AI try to humanize itself, right? The anthropomorphication of the AI itself, which is like the mirror image or flip side or inverse or whatever. And that's also sort of interesting to see.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something to think about as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, I second that concern, having just watched that movie, The Creator, as I mentioned. I have a question in the chat. So let's say this is a question coming from someone who's saying, this is a new idea to me, the idea of the cyborg. So, this raises all kinds of questions. Could we say, are you saying all women are cyborgs? Is this something you can decide for yourself? Do you get to say if you're a cyborg or not? It's a great question. Is it necessary to have a certain trait in both mind and body, or can one be considered? So those are questions coming from someone who's saying,
Yeah, I mean, this is both, again, I think this is one of those, the cyborg does a lot the cyborg as like a figure or a metaphor for thinking for me does a lot of like both and, right? And I think this is another place where it could be both and, right? So what I mean by that, right? So yeah, I think the like obvious type of cyborg would be, you know, somebody with an interdependence on a technology, somebody choosing to use the technology to extend their cognition or their physical abilities. You know, some of these science fiction figures are more increasingly real figures, right? Modeled on artificial intelligence or mimicry of a human or animal bodily form, right? Like the like Boston Robotics like police dogs, right, are like an animal version of Sophia, right? Um, so um, so yeah, so I think, you know, those are kind of the obvious cyborgs, right? But yeah, I think you're picking up on something I mentioned very briefly. So Donna Haraway proposes that yes, right, even, you know, women and her telling kind of especially women of color who exist kind of between different identities might be considered a cyborg, right? So it's easy for us to say, okay, well, this entity that is both machine and human or machine and organism, it straddles that boundary, therefore it's a cyborg. Haraway kind of proposes, well, why don't we say that, you know, people who you know, live between different language communities or different nationalities or different economic systems, right? Those might be types of cyborg being as well. Again, I don't think it's as obvious, but it is kind of what she proposes. So that's one thing. And then the other, so you ask, is this something you can decide for yourself if you are a cyborg? Some people do, right? So a couple of the disability activists that I mentioned, like Ashley Shue and Jillian Visa, self-identify as cyborgs and kind of talk about that identity and have kind of developed and evolved that identity for themselves in various ways in writing and in practice and in poetry in Jillian's case. So yes, it could be an identity you claim and develop. It could be an identity that you specifically do not claim, right? There are plenty of people who would reject that identity as well. So, you know, I think I don't think it's an absolute, right? I think it's something that you might feel affinity with, or you might kind of identify an affinity with a cyborg in a certain context. But it also might be something that just doesn't feel like a good fit, right? So I guess I offer it here. We offer it here in our book as a potential source of affiliation, a potential kind of perspective or a way to describe the different ways that we exist in between different systems or different groups in modern society. But it also doesn't have to describe every single instance when that happens. So I offer it as a possibility, and it is up to you to decide whether you want to claim it. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I believe we have come to the end of our questions. So thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you for all the questions that you've asked. And please join me in thanking Dr. Danya Glabau with your emoticon or real applause. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.